Reflections with Jim Pewter.
Oh, we're ready. And he's here, our mystery artist. Now he's going to unveil the blindfold. And you know who it is? It's Ian.
Well, it's Ian Whitcomb.
You're going to sing your big hit?
I guess so.
That's Ian Whitcomb. He's my special guest, and that's You Turn Me On, 1965. And I bet everywhere you go, Ian, people always kind of, they refer back to that tune a lot of times, don't they?
Jim, that's all they remember about me, and they wonder if I'm still going strong. But like Sam the Sham, I am still going strong. Curiously enough, a friend of mine who travels the world, he ended up as a professor in Saudi Arabia, and he found there was a record shop, one record store there in Riyadh, and he found a copy of You Turn Me On there, lying there, gathering dust for years and years and years. So it gets all over the world.
Sure does. And there's people that know sometimes more about your career than you do. You'll travel around and they'll come up to you with scrapbooks and they'll know the numbers of the records that you cut, the B-sides.
Yes. Well, apparently I think it was you who told me that you have audiences in Cuba, I think, who love a song of mine called Yaka Hula Hickey Doola or something like that. So, I mean, I don't know.
We're going to talk about some of the early days of rock, and we'll play some of your tunes. And I picked out a tune by Elvis Presley that you like. I know that you mentioned some of the tunes that we should program. And this is Mystery Train, and you probably heard this record for the first time when you were just a youngster. Right?
In England. Oh, I was 13, I remember, and it was on the first album that came out in England. And I love this because, I didn't realize it at the time, but I know now that there's no drums on this. It's quite incredible. It's pure rock and roll. It's the essence of rock and roll, and yet there's no drums. It's just a bass and it's a guitar.
Okay, Elvis, Mystery Train.
Train I ride, 16 coaches long. Train I ride, 16 coaches long. Well, that long black train got my baby and gone. Train, coming round the bend. bed. Train, train, coming round the bend. Well, it took my baby, but it never will again. No, not again. Train, train, coming down the line. Train, train, coming down the line. Well, it's bringing my baby, 'cause she's mine, mine, she's mine, mine. Train, train, coming round the bend, round the bend. Train, train, coming round the bend. Well, it took my baby, but it never will again, never will again.
That's Elvis Presley from out of Tupelo, Mississippi, under worldwide fame, and like Ian just said, has no drums on that record.
2 instruments. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I went on, to work later with the guitarist who played with him on his live shows. In fact, was with him on his last live show, James Burton. James Burton played guitar for me on a lot of records of mine. And then I may say, glory upon glory, he went on from me to playing with Elvis. But,
and before you, he was the lead guitarist with Ricky Nelson all those years.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
A real rock classic player.
Yeah. In fact, on the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which they still show in reruns, at the end, Ricky would always do his most current hit.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And then James Burton would be right there.
Oh, you could see him on the picture, could you?
Sure.
Oh,
yeah. Ian Whitcomb is my special guest, the man that recorded You Turn Me On and Where Did Robinson Crusoe Go with Friday on Saturday Night. We're going to be getting to all those. And then he produces for Mae West, which is, we got some worldwide exclusive tunes with Mae. And written a book called After the Ball, good book. It's pop music from rag to rock. And I suggest you pick it up because, Ian, I think you took, a couple of years off, didn't you?
3 years off, actually.
Yeah. And put a lot of work into this.
From my rock career. I might add that my rock career was slightly fading at the time and I hadn't got anything else to do, so sat down and wrote the book and found my rock roots.
I see. Well, let's go back to your early roots in England. There was a young teen idol that emerged around the time you were growing up called Cliff Richard.
Or Harry Webb, as he was.
That's
his
right.
real name is that. And actually, he's an Anglo-Indian. His parents were, he was brought up in India. And I remember him when he burst onto the screen via Jack Good's television show. I think it was called Oh Boy. And I remember he began as an impressionist or impersonator of Elvis Presley. He looked just like him, and he did all the same gestures. But his really first big hit was this record I think you're going to play, Living Doll, which was written by Lionel Bart, of course, who went on to write Oliver and shows like that. And Bart, at the time of this hit, was playing a silver-plated washboard in a skiffle group in a Soho coffee bar. Now, that might be Greek to you, but skiffle, but it was very big at the time. It consisted of groups with about 5 acoustic guitars going, oh, don't you rock me, Danny, oh, don't you rock me, Daddy. And Bart was playing the silver-plated washboard at the time. Living Doll, I think, was Cliff's first big hit. I shall never forget it because in about 1958, when this came out, I was stuck on top of a roller coaster which had broken down with a girl that I didn't like much, and they kept playing this record over and over again. It got stuck in the grooves, I think.
Were you way up on the top?
Yeah, and I was stuck with this rather unattractive girl, and we ran out of conversation, everything else too, and so all we heard was this Cliff Richard tune.
Got myself a crying, talking, sleeping, walking, living doll. Got to do my best to please her just 'cause she's a living doll. Got got a roving eye, and that is why she satisfies my soul. Got the one and only walking, talking, living doll. Well, take a look at her hair, it's real, and if you don't believe what I say, just feel. Gonna lock her up in a trunk, so no big hunk can steal her away from me. Got myself a crying, talking, sleeping, walking, living doll. Got to do my best to please her just 'cause she's a living doll. Got a roving eye, and that is why she satisfies my soul. Got the one and only walking, talking, living doll. It's real, and if you don't believe what I say, just feel. Gonna lock her up in a trunk, so no big hunk can steal her away from me. Got myself a crying, talking, sleeping, walking, living doll. Got to do my best to please her just 'cause she's a living doll. Got a roving eye, and that is why she satisfies my soul. Got the one and only walking, talking, living doll.
That's Cliff Richard. I think on one of his early records, the group was called Cliff Richard and the Drifters.
Yes, they had to change it because when they became popular, because of course it was the same name as the famous American Drifters, and they were changed to the Shadows.
Yeah, it would be kind of complicated if they were appearing and then everyone was yelling out, "There goes my baby," or "Save the last dance."
Exactly.
For me.
Well, the same thing happened to the Spinners in England. They're called the Detroit Spinners in England because there is already a folk group, an English folk group that sings folky stuff.
Have you always used the name Ian Whitcomb?
Well, I have no other name. My full name is Ian Timothy Whitcomb, and when I had my first record, I just call myself that. I mean, it seems all right to me.
Sure, a lot of people change their name. I'd say 80% of the people in show business have different names.
Well, they have odd names to start with. I remember that the first time that I became aware of odd names being in was in the mid-'60s when I was doing a rock and roll TV show, and the next act was announced as Simon and Garfunkel. I couldn't believe it. I thought, my goodness, they'll have to change their names if they have a hit, because you did not call yourself Garfunkel in those days. Because Doris Day had changed her name from Kappelhoff to Day, and so on, Kirk Douglas, and on and on and on. But of course, Elvis Presley, you see, was a very weird name at the time. I remember Johnny Ray saying in a later interview, he said, we couldn't believe it, he said, when Elvis came along, because we thought this is a really odd hick-sounding name. It sounds like some guy who's ploughing all day long. You see, it did sound odd at the time. Now it sounds perfectly natural. So
That's right.
I like to think that Ian Whitcomb sounds natural. But I wish people could pronounce Ian correctly, but they don't seem to be.
What do they say?
Well, older Americans insist on saying Ian. In fact, I've told one. I said, my name is Ian. No, kid, it's Ian, and that's that. And they say Ian. Girls tend to say Ian, and so it goes on.
There was a radio show you were doing a few days ago, and there was a man that was on the show. I think he owned a car dealership.
Right, Ray.
How was he referring to you again?
That's very funny. You're the second person in 10 hours or 2 hours who's told me that. Ian, was it Ian or something like that? He's a car dealer, man. But he has another difficulty too. He cannot speak about anything else apart from cars. So we'd get onto subjects, all kinds of subjects. It might be, some war or some political affair, but he'd always get, yeah, but we got great Ford cars here. He kept getting back to the price of these damned cars. Well, I've got a Ford, so he didn't have to convince me.
Right. Let's talk about a recent side that you cut called When Rock and Roll Was Young. It's a good record, and you wrote this
thank
tune,
you.
Ian?
I wrote it about 4 months ago in England. I've just come back from there. And I wrote it before Elvis died, I might add. And it was just my kind of salute to the good old days of rock and roll, which I grew up in. And I liked the tune, and I liked the whole thing immensely. And we cut it, as I said, about 3 months ago in England.
Yeah. Let's give it a listen.
Daisies were deeper and records were cheaper when rock and roll was young. I called you baby and you told me maybe when rock and roll was young. Teddy was ready in his blue suede shoes, reeling and rocking and calling it blues, and nobody bothered to turn on the news. Oh, when rock and roll was young. You could see Elvis's pelvis quite plainly. Oh, when rock and roll was young. Oh, while Jerry Lee Lewis rocked on so disdainly. When rock and roll was young. Yeah. Old folk got angry and they laid down the law. They said, turn off that racket. My eardrums are sore. But now they're all Elton fans. Ain't it a bore? Let's rock and roll once more. Oh, go now, we put the bump in the bump, bumpty bump, bump when rock and roll was young. Then in came the villain, a folknik called Dylan, and rock and roll grew cold. But Boney Monroe is still well and alive, and old Peggy Sue, she's just raring to jive. All that you say is revive 45, and rock and roll still young. Sing it again, girls. And rock and roll still young. One more time.
When Rock and Roll Was Young. Revive 45s. That's good.
That would be a good theme for you, Jim.
It
Hint,
would.
hint, hint.
Sure.
Yes. Revive 45.
Ian Whitcomb is my special guest. This is Jim Pewter. You're channeled into Rock Reflections. And tell me your definition again, Ian. Rock and roll and rock. Just rock.
Well, I mean, I think that the sky fell in 1965, and rock and roll to me was simply great, great fun, functional dance music And I remember it when I was young. I mean, all I can say it was my anthem. And rock, to me, was for much more intellectual people and for another side of the head, which is really, frankly, not for me. I mean, I'm sure it's for somebody else, but directly Dylan. I mean that on the song. When I say on that song, in came the villain, a folknik called Dylan. Well, I mean, he was the end for me. I mean, I'm sure I offend millions when I say that. But I couldn't understand a word he said. I still have no idea what Blowing in the Wind's about, unless it's a laxative or something. I have no idea what he's talking about. So it was Greek to me. I keep saying that. It was English to me, or something, right. Or Scottish or Welsh, or I don't know what it was.
You picked out a record by Bob Dylan. No, no, that's wrong. By Peter and Gordon, A World Without Love. And you worked with Peter, I know, in the early days, and you just saw him recently.
Well, and Gordon, of course.
That's right. Of course, they were a team, right?
I toured with Peter and Gordon many years ago on Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars, and we got to be fairly friendly. They're split up now. They're still friends. Peter, of course, is very successful as a manager. He manages Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor. And I saw Peter last week. We keep in touch constantly. In fact, I made a film for the BBC last year which had him in it, and his Rolls Royce, comparing that with my Ford. And but I'm happy. But anyway, I saw him last week because I went to see one of his acts, Linda Ronstadt, who was playing here in America, and she is wonderful, isn't it? She, I mean, I think she's, apart from being one of the sexiest girls around, I think she's the best girl singer. Of course, I might add that the other singer which I used to love was Connie Francis. I mean, I love. See, my three favourite singers are Ruth Etting from the 20s, Connie Francis, and Linda Ronstadt. And in fact, I told Linda that she ought to record Etting's songs like Love Me or Leave Me and Mean to Me and Wonderful. Anyway, what song are we going to hear now?
We're going to hear The World Without Love.
Written, of course, by Paul McCartney and John Lennon, I believe.
Yeah, they were in a group called, what was it?
The Bootles or something
Something like that. Yeah, they're successful for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. Birds sing out of tune and rain clouds hide the moon. I'm okay, here I'll stay with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I lose. So baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I'll know. So baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love.
Hey, we're moving out with 18 Whitcomb Street. And can you come back tomorrow?
Yes, and I'll keep playing the piano just like that, yeah.
Okay, because you're going to surprise us tomorrow. You're going to bring along a recording by Mae West singing Rock Around the Clock, song you produced.
Oh, wonderful. How thrilling. I must tell her.
All right. And I want to know some more inside information about Mae. And
I'll tell you as much as I'm allowed to say on the air.
Okay. Ian Whitcomb will be here tomorrow. This is Jim Pewter. We're signing out. Straight ahead. Bye-bye.
And now, Rock Reflections with Jim Pewter.
Special guest is Ian Whitcomb, and here's Fats Domino.
And whippoorwill call, and evening is nigh. I hurry to my blue heaven. You turn to the right, you find a little bright light that leads you to my blue heaven. You find a cozy place, fireplace, cozy room. Oh, the nest, that nest is where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, and the baby makes three. Be happy in my blue heaven. And whippoorwill call, and evening is nigh. I hurry to my blue heaven. Just turn to the right, you find a little bright light that leads you to my blue heaven. You find a cozy place, fireplace, cozy room. Oh, little nest, that nest is where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, and baby makes three. Be happy in my blue heaven.
That's Fats Domino on Rock Reflections from 56, My Blue Heaven. And a lot of people aren't aware, but people that are, been in music most of their life should be, that that was originally recorded by who, Ian?
By the late, great Gene Austin, who we both love, and he made the first million-selling vocal record in 1927, and that was the song My Blue Heaven.
There was an article in the newspaper, Los Angeles Calendar, and you belong to an organization. What's it called?
It's called NARAS, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, and we award the Grammys every year, which the Grammys are the awards they give to the artists who we vote are the best of the year. And I'm a governor of the Los Angeles chapter in what they call the liner notes section, which I'm sad to say is a dying form of writing. You hardly ever get liner notes today except on classical albums. I always make sure that on practically every album I've made, I think I've got there are liner notes, because I always like to read liner notes on the back of albums. Even with the first Elvis album, it had a terrific bit of ad copy on the back about Elvis in very glowing, gushing terms. And anyway, so I was about to say that I wrote up to the LA Times on behalf of the Grammy people, complaining about a remark made by Phil Spector in the LA Times, because he is a member of our organization too, and he was annoyed because Gene Austin, we had put him up to be in the Recording Hall of Fame, the Record Hall of Fame, with his record in 1927 of My Blue Heaven. It was my idea. And Spector complained in the LA Times. He said, "Who is this guy, Gene Austin? I never heard of him. The only guy who recorded that was Fats Domino." And I wrote up to the Times and said, "Well," I said, "what ignorance." Much as I admire Spector, he is showing typical rock and roll ignorance, not involved in what happened the day before yesterday. And I said that maybe in 20 years' time, the world will say, "Who is Phil Spector?" Well, of course, that was a bit of journalese, but it got me in print. But I did feel very strongly about this, because here we are on a show honoring, some of the old rock and roll people. Well, in turn, I think we should honor those who went before us. And well, I don't just honor them because of course I love them. I mean, I love so many areas of music, and so much which America has produced. I mean, it really has produced the world's popular music, and I speak as an Englishman who grew up hearing American jazz and hillbilly and rhythm and blues, and it's all marvelous, absolutely marvelous, and without it my world would totally collapse. But I really go back to the 1890s and begin with ragtime because I adored that as well.
When you were growing up as a young boy in England, I'm sure you listened to the skiffle music, and we picked out a skiffle cut, Don't You Rock Me Daddy-O by the Vipers. Can you tell the people what skiffle is?
Yes, well, skiffle in this sense was a term given to a form of English pop which came to fame in the mid-50s. It was based on earlier American black music where a bunch of black chaps would get together in, say, Chicago, and they would try and get the money together to pay the rent, and they'd throw a rent party, and they'd be invited to bring along any kind of instrument, and many of them were homemade. There'd be kazoos, and there'd be tissue paper and comb and ukuleles and guitars, and they would generally play sort of slightly off-color or bluesy songs. And in England, this form was revived, in particular by Lonnie Donegan, who was the guitarist with the Chris Barber Band, and he came out with a thing called the Rock Island Line, which went on the charts in this country, and that started the whole skiffle revival. So really skiffle was a group of English chaps playing in an earlier black style, playing these weird things like Don't You Rock Me Daddy-O. This is before rock and roll, but it sounds very rock-like, rock and roll-like to me.
Well, this is about mid-50s then,
right?
Now me and my wife went to town. Well, we went to buy a $10 gown. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Well, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Well, don't she rock me, daddy-o. She tried the green, she tried the red. Say away, lady, say away. I'll have them both, that's what she said. Say away, lady, say away. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Well, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Well, she put one on and it looked a treat. Say away, lady, say away. Then found another man to meet. Say away, lady, say away. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, Mr. Lee, my girl alone. Say away, lady, say away. Well, she gets what she wants at home. Say away, lady, say away. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Now, don't she rock me, daddy-o. I'm going upstairs to pack my trunk. Say away, lady, say away. Don't find a bar and get me drunk. Say away, lady, say away. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Don't she rock me, daddy-o. Yeah, don't she rock me, daddy-o. Oh, don't she rock me, daddy-o.
she rock me, daddy-o, don't she rock me, daddy-o.
That's the Vipers, and Ian and I were just discussing the lyrics on that, how that became a hit in England. Certainly wasn't because of the words, was it?
I don't think so. I think possibly because the word rock was in there, and this came out just on the eve of rock and roll when the term was being bandied about in England and had a certain magic. Possibly that helped it become a hit. And of course the rhythm too, those guitars scrubbing away, is very hypnotic. But the words really don't tie up. As far as I can make out, this fellow is annoyed because his girl has bought a gown and then gone off with some other chap. So perhaps when he says, "Don't you rock me, daddy-o," he's aiming it at this fellow who took the girl away. I don't know, but I don't think it matters, and I think it was a hit because of the rhythm and because of this constant use of the word rock.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the artists who are now in rock or got started in pop music, all were in skiffle groups in the early days in England, weren't they? John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
Exactly. I don't think Mick Jagger was, but many people were. Cliff Richard came up through a skiffle group, and there were other people. Marty Wilde, who was very big at one time in Europe, came through a skiffle group, and so on. Many of them came through skiffle.
After skiffle, why do you think, Ian, that people like, say, a Marty Wilde and a Cliff Richard didn't connect big in America in the early days when they had all the ingredients? They were good-looking fellas. They could sing well. You look at the early 60s when people, like Bobby Vinton came on the scene, or even before him, Frankie Avalon. I mean, Cliff had all... Do you think it was possibly the American disc jockeys just weren't playing that much British music at the time, and maybe it needed a few years to go by before a big boom with the Beatles kind of broke through? But, like Cliff Richard, the young ones, and Livin' Doll, even though Livin' Doll was a chart record in America, it wasn't like a top 10 hit. And I often wondered why.
Well, we have a phrase in England which goes, you're carrying coals to Newcastle. Newcastle is a big coal town, so it would be absurd to carry coal there because they've got it there. And that, I think, applies to these artists like Cliff Richard at that time and Marty Wilde. They were copying American artists, and they were carbon copies, so America didn't really need it. It didn't sound anything different, and nor did they look all that different. They looked like American singers, so they had it over here. I think that when the Beatles came along, they really did look very different, and I think the appearance is very important in rock and roll. And originally, of course, the Beatles were recording American songs, but they weren't current American hits. You see, all they did in England at that time of Cliff in the late 50s, was they would cover American records, constantly covering. The Beatles didn't cover. I mean, they didn't cover new hits. They were recording old or obscure rhythm and blues hits, which were not being played very much on white radio at that time, not terrifically. I think I'm right in saying that. Twist and Shout by the Isley Brothers wasn't that big a hit, I don't think. And so when they came out with it, it sounded new to a whole generation of young white kids. And of course, on top of the fact, the real plus factor were that we had these four cuddly boys. You see, I think that's very important. Brian Epstein was very clever there in sacking the original drummer with the band. He wanted a real character. He formed a kind of our gang from the Beatles. I think one mustn't forget that aspect of them. That there's always room in show business for a lovable gang of four different personalities, all together in one team. That's why the Monkees were a success too, and partly why the Beatles were. They also had a great talent for writing songs. That was incidental. But they came out of that tradition of the Marx Brothers, of our gang, of Max Sennett groups. They were a group of individual, wild, chaotic personalities. I think that was their secret.
Yeah. Well, here's a man... song we picked out, Blue Jean Bob, but Gene Vincent influenced the Beatles and just about everybody in rock and roll. He was an original from America. And do you have any interesting story about Gene?
Well, I always loved Gene Vincent, and Jack Good, who used to produce Shindig and began in England producing Oh Boy and television shows like that, was really the man responsible for creating the image of Gene Vincent, because when he first appeared at London Airport to play some shows in Britain, Jack was out there to greet him, and when he saw the young Gene Vincent, he looked very, very polite, a southern gentleman wearing a red felt ice hockey jacket, and Jack said, "This is no good at all. I mean, this man, he's too nice. I must make him into a dangerous dagger boy image." And he noticed that Gene walked with a slight limp. He said, "I'll capitalize on this," said Jack. "I'll build a series of steps on the television set which he won't be able to walk up and down." Well, the devil could walk. He could negotiate the steps extremely well at the time of the broadcast, so I was reduced to standing at the side of the set, shouting at Gene Vincent, "Limp, you bugger, limp!" And that is the true story behind how Gene Vincent became the evil, malformed Richard III of rock.
Blue jean baby, with your big blue eyes, don't want you looking at other guys. Got to make you give me one more chance. I can't keep still, so baby, let's dance. Well, the blue jean bop is the bop for me. Well, it's the bop, it's the dungaree. You dip your hip, free your knee, squeal on your heel, baby, 1, 2, 3. Well, the blue jean bop, baby, blue jean bop, blue jean bop, baby, blue jean bop, baby, won't you bop with Gene? Bop, we got bop. Baby, when I bop with you, well, my heart starts a hopping like a kangaroo. My feet do things I've never done before. Well, the blue jean, baby, give me more. Well, the blue jean bop, baby, blue jean bop, baby, blue jean bop, baby, won't you bop with Gene? Rock it again, blue cat, go! Baby, won't you bop with Gene? Blue cat, bop with Gene now, let's go! Blue jean bop, blue jean bop, baby, blue jean bop, blue jean bop, blue jean, baby, won't you bop with Gene?
That's Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps and Blue Jean Bop. They just released a 4-disc set on Gene out of France, Pathé Marconi, and all his early Capitol releases. And Gene was, well, when Presley hit on the scene, of course, Vincent had Bebop-A-Lula. And I kind of correlate sometime that, like, the Beatles came on the scene, were successful. Then the Stones came with more of a rebel image. And that's how Gene Vincent was in the kind of the late 50s. He used to wear black leather on stage and perform, you know, and a lot of crazy antics that he would do on stage with the Blue Caps. This is Jim Pewter with special guest Ian Whitcomb. This is Rock Reflections. And from the world of rock, we're going to go to a Cole Porter tune now, I believe.
Yes,
right?
Done in the rock and roll fashion. My attempt to get back into the rock and roll vein, but it's a marvelous Cole Porter song from the late 20s, and it mentioned the word voodoo. So I thought, well, let's go all the way on this, and let's get a real jungle feel. And we recorded this about 2 months ago in England. It hasn't even. Well, it's going to be released very, very soon. So you're getting an exclusive here
Worldwide. And this is Ian on vocal.
Right.
All right, this is You Do Something to Me.
You do something to me, something that simply mystifies me. Tell me, what can it be? Can it be? You have the power to hypnotize me. Let me live beneath your spell. Do that voodoo that you do so well. Do something to me that nobody else can do. You do something to me, something that simply mystifies me. Tell me, what can it be? You have the power to hypnotize me. Let me live beneath your spell. Do that you do so well. Do something to me that nobody else can do. Here it comes again, that voodoo power. You cannot escape it, night and day. For in this terrifying, mystical world, you'll never escape that feminine power.
You do something to me, that voodoo. Thank you, Ian, for spending some time with us, reminiscing, and it's always great to talk to you because you're a special talent, and not only with what you're doing today, but you have great insight into the past, and you present it really well.
Well, I've enjoyed it, Jim, and we're two of a kind.
That's right. So we're going to bring on right now Mae West, another record you produced, and change the lyric around just a bit as we close.
Oh, which one is this?
Happy Birthday. You call it Happy Birthday 21?
21. It's in her new film, too, Sextet.
Great. Okay. Here's Mae, and this is Jim and Ian moving out. Remember, we went to different high schools together. Bye-bye now.
Happy birthday, 21. Happy birthday, 21.
Tonight's the night I've waited for, because you're not just my fan anymore. You've grown into the biggest boy beneath the sun. Happy birthday, 21. What happened to that baby life that made you blush when you asked for my autograph? You're old enough to get my key and have some fun. Happy birthday, 21. When you were only 12, you wrote me a letter When you were sweet 16, I liked you even better. When you were 20, I only had to wait 1 year. But now you've grown up, your future is sewn up. You can do more than vote and drink beer. If I should smile with sweet surprise, it's just that you've grown up before my very eyes. You've turned into the biggest bar beneath the sun. Happy birthday, 21. If I should smile with sweet surprise, it's just that you've grown up before my very eyes. You've turned into the biggest thing beneath the sun. Happy birthday, 21. Oh, blow out your candles, big boy, or I'll do it for you.